get up here, I can go to work, or I can get up and I can do that. I can remember one fellow talking in his, and I can't remember which consumer it was who had written this article, but he spoke about he really looked forward to Sundays because he wanted to, he looked forward to going to church because that was the structure. On Sunday he got up and he went to church, and he'd go there regularly and he got involved in the church activities. But as soon as he got a girlfriend, he no longer needed the church, you know, because he had something else to do on the Sunday that he preferred to do. So he'd put that, how he understood that was he had put the church and that structure into his life, so he had something to do. But as soon as he found something else, then he moved on and done that, like having a girlfriend, and that was good. Patricia Deegan talks about stages of recovery. She thinks that, you know, it's just like any other illness. It's like if you're told you have cancer, or if you suddenly become paraplegic or whatever, then you go in this stage of denial, and that is a normal process. That thing of, oh no, I don't have the illness, and what health professionals typically label that is lack of insight. You know, it's not, if this person's in a normal, healthy process of denial, and well, a normal process if you think about the impact it would have on us if we received those diagnoses, and yet we label that lack of insight. Then going through stages of despair and anguish, and then finally with the birth of hope. And for Patricia Deegan, it's that birth of hope was the turning point and the important part for her in her recovery. Do you, many of you read Patricia's work? Patricia had very early onset of hallucinations. She started hallucinating at the age of 7 and was certainly well into her psychiatric career by the age of 18, and spent many years in long stay hospitals. And she writes a lot about her experiences, and she then went on and completed a PhD in psychology, and now runs the National Empowerment Centre in America, and she talks a lot about, you know, her experience, how she was treated, etc. What she had to do then as a result to combat that, and how she got on with her life in spite of the illness, and she still does have active symptoms at this point in time. She also talks about the recovery process and a paradox for Patricia. What she says is that a part of the recovery process is really, to recover you have to realise what you can't do and what you can, you know. So you have to acknowledge what you can't do before you can actually be aware of what you can do and move on. So it's really a very strengthening process to go through having a mental illness, really coming to terms with your limitations and then finding out how you then move on from that. And there was a significant amount of anger over treatment and staff attitudes in a lot of the literature. To talk a little bit about some of the issues that we had in this research and how we dealt with them, was one about writing the proposal for funding. Clearly it had to be a qualitative study to understand the meaning that consumers attributed to that, to their experience. And as most of you know, qualitative studies are hard to get funded. So it sort of involved a little writing stuff in there that perhaps you might not otherwise see in a project, but that was certainly an issue that we had about that. Another thing we had to grapple with was, how do we ask questions that are meaningful to the participants? And so we wanted to learn about people's experience of recovery, but how did we, who had not experienced that process, know what would be meaningful to ask? How we tackled that was that we set up focus groups. So we had 2 focus groups with different groups of consumers, and they didn't necessarily have schizophrenia, but we said, look, this is what we want to do. Can you tell us what questions we need to ask so we can get those answers? What would be meaningful for you? You know, how do we broach this? So we run focus groups to try and get some understanding. So we'll weren't going in there and saying, well, you know, it's pretty pointless to try and get a consumer understanding of recovery if we as the professionals, or seen as supposedly the experts, go in with our expert definitions and then ask them to fit into it, because clearly that's what's been wrong in the past. You know, we have to find some other way of doing it, and coming from a consumer perspective. So we had the focus groups and developed our questions from there, and we started off with very open-ended question asking about their journey of recovery, because that was something that seemed to be very central for a lot of people. We also had set up a steering committee that consisted of quite a few other professionals in our region, and they overseed what we were doing, and we discussed any of the problems we were having with them, and they also challenged us. One of the things they challenged us about was how do we deal with our bias as researchers, and they very much encouraged us to keep a running dialogue of, you know, or diary if you like, of the processes that we went through, how our thinking changed about recovery over this, and we've been doing that. So, and as I said, I've already spoke to you about how we spoke about recovery. We decided that we were very much took the view as we were not the experts, and when we went and spoke to people, we said to them, you know, we're really putting you in the position of being the expert. We want you to tell us how you have recovered. The other thing I've already mentioned is the term, you know, is the term recovery appropriate? I mean, as I said, Strauss talks about improvement. If we talk about recovery, then that means people can recover. And a lot of people say, well, no, I haven't recovered, but I am in recovery, as opposed. So the language and the terminology is also important, I think, when you're talking about recovery, improvement, and that. I mean, what does it actually mean? The methodology for the study, as I said, it had to be qualitative. And I've already talked about how, you know, how we went about determining if the person actually had schizophrenia in the first place, by using the SCID. Oh, Carly's telling me to say we did it after the end. I mean, that was the really last thing we did. So in order of priority. But again, that was one of the things that we had to have in there to get the money. We had to say, well, we can say there's people that, and we've interviewed 42 people to date, and there's only been one person that we have interviewed who has not met who hasn't met a retrospective diagnosis of schizophrenia. So that was right at the end, and the demographic stuff about the onset was second from the end, and all the stuff we wanted to know is what we did first. We also decided that we would pay consumers for participating in the